Welcome to the conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation, and not just Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And with us is our very special guest tonight, Chief Clerk William Etheridge of the Criminal Court, New York City. And Mr. Etheridge, our distinguished and central figure of the court system, has participated with us in the past at the Bronx Criminal Court, addressing students from all the high schools of Bronx County in the Supreme Court, at Stuyvesant High School, addressing the students on the classes of race, religion, sexual orientation. And now he's with our own television program, and this is a coup as far as I'm concerned. It took me the entire year to get him out of his busy schedule right before the holiday of Christmas. And a very Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah to all of our listeners, and of course a joyous Kwanzaa. And we welcome you to now learn about the court system and the wonderful courts available to all of your needs, and unfortunately to all of society's problems as well. With that, I want to introduce Mr. Etheridge. Again, he's the Chief Clerk for the Criminal Court of New York City, and he's going to give you a little bit of his biography so you can understand from whence he's come and all the committees he serves on and how he serves the needs of our city. Bill?
Good. Thank you, Shannon. I've been in the court system since 1973. 1973, I had graduated from college, and at that time knew very little about the court. And what was happening at that time in the country was somewhat revolutionary in that there was a movement going on, which all of a sudden brought the courts into the homes of so many minorities, just people across the country, because so much was happening. It seemed at that point it was brought to the attention of people that there was very, very few representation in the courts. The courts was pretty much a dominated male, white organization, and there was an outcry by people bringing that to the attention. And as I graduated from college, the word had kind of went out that if you had a college degree, they were looking to hire you to work in the court. They was concerned about the images, and a lot of the organizations, Black Panthers and whatnot, took a position that they did not even want to be handled by people who are not of color. So I heard it. I applied to go into the court, and I was interviewed. So I went into 100 Center Street, where I'm the chief clerk now. This was back in 1973, applying for a court officer job. And at that time, I met a young man, not a young man at that time, Walter Hammond, who was actually doing the interviewing. And Mr. Hammond asked me to take a walk with him. And we actually went down the staircase of 100 Center Street, and he talked about the absence and what it meant psychologically for people to come into the family courts, the surrogates courts, the criminal, the civils, and see this absence. And he thought that the court would be an approved place. Asked me right there on the staircase, was I interested? And at that point in time, I said, yeah, no problem. And it was the start of something extremely interesting, because one thing about the court system is a people court, meaning that you're meeting all people from different parts of the world. So that started in 1973, and then rapidly things started to change. 1977, they came out with the Rockefeller Law, which created the Rockefeller drug courts. And at that time, they had the same kind of issue, meaning that if a person was arrested with a certain amount of drugs, he got 15 to life. And that was some serious, that's still some very serious time. They talk about trying to reform those laws now. Then they went on a recruitment to get minorities to work in that court. Why? Because it seemed that, at least in New York, the large majority of people that they were actually making the arrests on were minorities. So I was recruited to kind of come in, work in this Rockefeller court, and it was a very emotional court, because no matter how small the quantity, people was facing a lot of time. And that was back in 77. So about 79, I put in to go to Syracuse Court, Queens County. And that was an experience. Syracuse Court back then is when someone dies without a will or died with a will, they process his estate. So I went into Syracuse Court, and it was almost like working in a private business. It was very, very different from courts. And at that time, back in the late 70s, the people who worked there were not civil servants. The Syracuse Court did not honor the civil service law because it was almost like a separate entity. It was like an appointed sort of entity. And I worked there for about, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years. And it was good work. I mean, you learn a lot. You learn, in terms of how people accumulate estates and things of that nature. And they only had court, I think, 1 day a week. So the majority of my duties was doing small estates. And then what happened, they had a new administration. They wanted the people who work in surrogates court to go through the civil service process and not be hired through this quasi-private system. And what happened was people had to take a test. And civil service, you got the highest person gets the first job preference. Surrogates court, because it was unknown, I think it was a desirable court. So I got kind of bumped from that position and ended up going back to special narcotics court. And the thing about special narcotics court, it was a big community. It was, where surrogates court was a small community, special narcotics court was a big community. And it seemed like I liked that social piece of the system. Obviously I didn't enjoy sitting in on the trials where, people's lives was at stake. But it was a learning experience. 1980, I went into civil court. And the only reason I chose civil court at that time was because I had already worked in family court in 73. I went to surrogates court. I went to Supreme Court criminal. Civil court was a court I had not worked in. And at that time, the naivete said, one court is pretty much no different than another. And I thought I would kind of go and learn. But civil court was like a back office court. That was a learning experience. And sometimes I regretted initially whether that was a good idea or not. But I think in the long run, it did turn out to be a good idea. Because when I went into civil court, I was assigned to housing court. And housing court at that time was very, very, it was a crowded environment. It was pretty much was a place where people were being evicted for non-payment of rent. It was when it was first set up in the early 60s, it was to have landlords live up to the housing guidelines and maintain their housing, but it ended up shifting and became an eviction place where you just kind of come in and non-eviction was about 85% of the work. And I mean, it was masses of people in there, and it was a very high energy sort of type of work. While I was working in housing court, Judge Israel Rubin at the time was administrative judge of that court, came up with an idea and also some funding to have a computer system made for the court system, meaning all the housing court would now go from a paper court to a computer court. And they put together this team. And I was selected to kind of be part of that team because I was just a clerk working in the court. They needed some operational people. And I started working there, and it was a very interesting thing because when we first started working on developing the housing court, I mean, it was hundreds of people. And we really got down to, it must have been about just 5 and 6. And I think that IBM was kind of leading, the development of that at the time. They were doing it kind of pro bono, thinking that they would get the contract if, in fact, we liked what they developed. So I started working and eventually became in charge of the housing court automation system, which was a citywide system, and actually went into Buffalo and Syracuse and some of the other upstates. So that brought a lot of attention to me based on the work that I was doing, because it was analytical work. When you're sitting and you're developing systems, you have to go find out what the user wants, translate it into a hard copy, and people at that time liked the product. It brought attention to myself, and then I was catapulted to supervisory positions. I was a deputy chief clerk in civil. Then I became first deputy chief clerk, and in 1994 there was a chief clerk opening. And at that time, I had gotten some calls from outside people who said, "Bill, we'd just like to take a look at you, just kind of come in." And I did. And I came in, I put in for the chief clerk position. And in 1994, I was elected chief clerk of the New York City Criminal Court, which at that time I had not worked in, even though I worked in Supreme Criminal. And it was a very interesting undertaking. 1,600 people, 8 different sites. We had an overtime budget then, $7-8 million. I think now we may be, $9-10 million. And it was a very, very fast-paced court in that arrest to arraignment was a really, really big part of our court. And plus the criminal court people, because in terms of the other courts, it had the largest overtime budget, we tended to get people who came into criminal court and stayed in criminal court. And they liked the opportunity to, make more money, right there on the job rather than get a second job. So criminal court was very, very interesting to me. Then we had 600 court officers. That was almost like a third. I mean, a third of your employees were court officers. And they were young court officers because they would come in. That was where people, when they came into the court officers, that was the training ground. And then after a year and a half, they would go to Supreme Court. So it was a manager's experience. And so I came there. I learned a lot. I mean, a lot of the issues as a chief clerk is you're the second highest, you're the highest non-judicial person, and you work with an administrative judge. An administrative judge oversees that you're the second highest person in that particular court. So it's a lot of responsibility. You're talking about budget, human resource, hiring, firing, counseling. You're the face of the court. You're the liaison. And it created a host of opportunities as far as exposures. One of the exposures was I went out to Reno, Nevada on a team building program, which they had in the court system. And while I was participating in the team building program in Reno, I was somewhat recruited to be part of what they call an urban court managers program, which was funded by the federal government, where they were bringing in the top urban courts in the country. And they created this kind of opportunity where they can all come together and collectively talk about their issues. And this was from California, Chicago, Washington, D.C. So there became more exposure. And then based on the job that I did there, because basically it was kind of like a think tank, I was recruited to be on the board of the Justice Management Institute, which is housed out in Colorado. It's a small consultant firm. And at that point, consultant firms were becoming very, very big in the court. And the reason they become very, very big in the court, because the upper managements of the courts felt that for them to learn about their court and to problem solve their court, rather than do it internally, they would bring in consultants. And pretty much the consultants would come in and speak to the people who actually worked in the courts to find out to solve these problems. And then, so what happened during that period, so now I'm on the board, Justice Management Institute, and we have a dynamic leader in our courts, Justice Judith Kaye, and along with Robert Keating, who was administrative judge of the criminal court. They come up with these unique ideas to create community courts. And what it seemed like, the court system, which was perceived as a relatively boring place, now all of a sudden was in the New York Times. It's getting major attention. The courts are doing these innovative things. What is this community court? They was having community service, acupuncture.
Don't forget about Red Hook.
And where that was started at 54th Street, and then from 54th Street.
Judge Weinberg is there now.
And then from 54th Street, because it kind of got national acclaim, even to the point where, overseas would come in, because it was getting so much attention about these innovative ways to deal with social problems. And then they came out with drug courts. What happened in the late 60s, early 70s with the problem with the drugs, a lot of people became drug addicts, and a lot of the crime was a result of the drug addicts. And so they said, rather than just keep locking them up and putting them in jail, maybe we should focus on the problem of drug addiction. So they came up with drug courts. It was a whole new way of looking at courts. And there was naysayers who felt like, look, we're not in the business of it because it required a lot of resources. But then but the public liked what it meant. So we got community courts in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which was in a place that was somewhat of a depressed place. And at first, there was kind of questions, the pros and cons, and it seemed that these courts not only were well received, but then they grew in volume. And one of the problems with these courts, the facilities were small because they was geared to handle a certain population, but all of a sudden the population grew, in terms of the types of cases coming in there, and it required, facility issues. So with the changes in the courts, the new direction it went to, it just happened. Like I'm just there. Time is moving rapidly. It was a heck of an experience. It gave me national exposure, just kind of going around different countries and meeting my counterparts all over the country. And I guess that is just kind of give you an overview of my involvement. That is how I evolved in the court system. So I guess that's kind of a little bit, in answering your question, a little bit about myself, Shannon.
Thank you. And also about the courts, we have Judge Bill Miller in Brooklyn supervising all the varied courts in Brooklyn. Isn't it true that Brooklyn has been sort of a testing ground for the domestic violence, the teenage abuse, the Red Hook Criminal Justice Center under Judge Calabrese? It's sort of been like the proving ground for all these new initiatives.
Brooklyn, and interesting. The courts work in partnership with different agencies. A court does not work alone. And the DA in Kings County has been one of the more innovative DAs in terms of let's try these new things. And with that kind of attitude, it makes it very easy cooperatively to take it on. Whereas in other counties, the DA may say, let's wait and see. So Brooklyn has been an area that the district attorney, District Attorney Hines, has embraced, which allows us to cooperatively, take this on and do it. So if you get the DA who is supportive, then you get the police departments who are supportive. It makes it very easy to go in and try these things out with that kind of support system. And Judge Miller, who's probably the longest supervising judge in the United States, he's open to that kind of thing. So Brooklyn has been a part of the course that we're able to tap in, and they've been open to trying new things.
Interestingly enough, District Attorney Hines was one of the first district attorneys to work with our organization, Blacks and Jews in Compensation, under the chairmanships of Judge William Thompson, the Appellate Division, and Judge Jerome Hornblatt from the Supreme Court. And then, of course, we partnered up with you, my good friend, and Judge Juanita Bing Newton as soon as she became the administrative judge in the Supreme Court and then the criminal court. And then we did work with all of the district attorney offices. And you, of course, served with Judge Bing Newton. And perhaps you can tell about your relationship with us over the years and the Bronx Supreme Court programs we did with the School Safety Division, the Stuyvesant, and how you fared with our programming.
Well, not just Blacks and Jews in Conversation was innovative. It was new, and it was risky. But it was something that I felt was kind of ahead of the curve. Meaning that at some point, as these various different groups were learning, how to pressure, how to be aggressive, how to get what they want, how to utilize politics and strength, it also created a situation where everybody became adversarials. And not just for Blacks and Jews in Conversation, said at some point we got to sit down and we got to work in the best interest of the public. We need to learn more about each other, more so than being a competitor. And I thought that was extremely innovative. And so I made myself available to go and talk to young people. And what you find is that young people perceive the world just how it was taught to them. A lot of times they don't have the actual experience to where they can say, this is something that I know. But if in their community they have a perceptions of Jews, Hispanics, Italians, Irish, those perceptions become real to them. And then we found when we get them together, they have similarities. Everybody doesn't come from a home, with a lot of money. A lot of people come from, places where they have had some issues in terms of hot, cold water and no heat, and people know what it is to have, in terms of the monetary opportunities that their parents can present, and they had more in common than differences. and being that certain things like, you know, your accent, your color, you know, your hair became such a obvious notice something that you can notice, but the life experience was so similar, and you didn't know it until you sat down and you talked about it. And I know myself, I would go to managers meeting, and you know, people were using the term touchy-feely, where they would get everybody together and try to learn a little bit about yourself, and everybody be a little stiff. And then when you realize, you know, the hardship to life, you know, people would come here from various different parts of the country, and they didn't have it easy. You know, you learn that because someone's Hispanic, they come from different parts of the world. And then you realize even with Jews, I mean, you kind of clump them all together. Different Jews have different perspectives and different values, and you know, and especially when you're black, when you're black, you would speak of white, and white would encompass Jews and Irish, Italians and Polish. We just threw them all together. We got some problem with white people. We didn't even recognize the various differences and attitudes that they had amongst themselves and the various different groups.
The whites never saw us as whites.
Right.
And this is one of the frequent discussions. You are part of the Franklin Williams Commission and the Judicial Friends and many other commissions, and it was my great honor to receive a distinguished award from the Franklin Williams Commission this year. So I would think that you are pleased with the efforts of the last 15 years of Blacks and Jews in Conversation.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the Jewish organization, I like to say, has always been a very verbal organization and a verbal people. And they've always been very intellectual. And even with NAACP, they played a huge role in the organizing it. And I remember, a book written, The Closest of Strangers, that was written about, blacks and Jews and how closely, physically, in terms of just community and living together. So to take that leadership and say, guys, let's dialogue. Our children need to recognize that we're not the issue. I mean, if the landlord's the issue, let it be the landlord. If the mayor's the issue, let it be the mayor. If it's the governor, the president. But we cannot let this continual issue be our differences, and we're sharing space so closely. So I embrace that. I mean, and there's something, I guess we all have to applaud an organization that says, let's dialogue, let's talk. So yes, I'm a big fan of not just Blacks and Jews in Conversation, and I'm hoping that more and more people see the importance of it, and it just kind of grows and catch fires, and people just become excited about learning about the differences and the similarities, and come up with other strategies in dealing with our problems rather than create these win-lose scenarios and start creating more win-win scenarios.
Well, I thank you. Your support has been unending. And as has founding president Judge Douglas, who was the head of the Franklin Williams Commission of Minorities in the Courts. Now we have a black president, and from the pictures in the papers today, he's quite a handsome-looking figure, quite a charismatic-looking leader. And I would think that his election is certainly a vindication of all the efforts that the courts and ourselves and your organizations have been striving for. Would you agree?
It creates a phenomenal paradigm shift. I mean, people have a perception of race, they have perceptions of religion, and for 2008, for us to be at a place where, we're throwing those things out the window. I mean, not just the election of an African-American president. I mean, you're talking about someone who is being perceived, who has been acknowledged as an intellectual. You talk about #1 in your class, Harvard Review, and you're talking about an academic achievement that for any race, for any religion, I mean, that is by itself is to be applauded. So I think what happens is it's attacking a lot of myths, a lot of attitudes that we have about each other. And I think that, and like you talking about I think when we talk about the picture, I think they kind of showed him, as someone who takes pride in, being in shape, which is interesting. They have two sons, 35 and 32, and the old, both of them participated in sports coming up. They played basketball, baseball, the whole bit. And one is a lawyer, Midtown attorney in a bankruptcy firm, and the youngest one is the executive at Saks Fifth Avenue. And what's so interesting about it is that they found it somewhat racist and demeaning when people would even ask them, hey, you want to join the attorney basketball league, you play basketball, because they thought that, all African Americans play ball, and playing ball was looked at as a negative thing. And when all of a sudden someone's running for president, they saying, look, I'm going out to play ball. I mean, it put a whole different spin. So the world that we grew up in, the world we embraced, the ignorances that were part of our lives are shattered instantly. And it has changed the world and how we see the world, and it has created an interest that I thought that I would never see in my lifetime. So right, these are extremely interesting times. I think that the thing about President-elect Obama, he has completed the certifications. He has went through the process in terms of readying oneself in terms of scholastically, academically, intellectually, and the fact that he's African American, just speaks to, if a person commits himself to something, it goes beyond race. So it's shattering all the stereotypes, I guess.
Well, and for Jews also we had our stereotypes. We had great sports people in all the sports, and people think that they're all like me. But no, we had great sports leaders, and we love our figures to look like that, and it's a great source of inspiration. We have a minute left. You're a founding member of the Tribune and 100 Black Men, which we've supported. And I just want to say that I was at the leadership conference in the Justice Center about violence and youth. And we have, in the next 40 seconds, any last comments about those seminars?
Well, I'll tell you, what happened was we put on Franklin Williams Commission put on a program about gang violence. And so we reached out to an organization that really commits itself to reaching out to the gangs, giving them alternatives, and pretty much teaching them through education, about better attitudes and value. The interesting thing was that Shannon was very, very disturbed. He came to me at the program. He said, Bill, I'm leaving. I'm mad. Because one of the presenters was saying some things, some very strong things in terms of the ex-mayor. I think he may have said some very, very strong things about the president. And Shannon was disturbed, vocal about it, and people brought it to my attention. He brought it to my attention. So I think what was learned about that is that you have the perception that everybody's embracing everything the same way. And when I heard Shannon talk, Shannon said, "Hey, Bill, how dare someone come into a learning institution like Pace Law School and say these mean-spirited things against the president?" And at the time, I think that one ignorantly didn't recognize that there was people who felt that way, and Shannon was right. I mean, we in a very sophisticated way, we can express our displeasure without being rude and discourteous and things of that nature. And I spoke to the president of John Jay, who was actually the speaker, and I said, your message may have been good, but I think what you don't want to do is speak in extremes where you're going to turn off that person who's going to lose the message because you have spoke about it in such a way that it has been disrespectful to a different group of people. And I think he recognized that maybe because of his passion and emotion that he did say things. And when you speak to an audience, you think everybody's kind of like, thinking that same way. But I think Shannon, in his own interesting way, did something very educational that day. And I think I need to say to you, Shannon, thank you for that.
And thank you, Bill. It's been a great privilege to have you on. and to take time off right before the holiday and from the courts, and finally to come here. And I hope you'll come back, and we'll continue this discussion, because we've only scratched the surface, and much appreciation for all your support, personally for the organization throughout these years.
And thank you, and continue your good work. And I like to be thought of as definitely a friend of the organization. Anything that I can do, definitely reach out to me, because you're definitely doing God's work. Thank you.
And thank you, and you can count on it.
Thank you.
Good night.